The whole point, I suppose, about communication, I mean, we know that research is quite complicated. Research findings tend to be quite technical. So research always needs to be translated. Particularly now it's increasingly specialised. You know, if you try and read a research paper, I mean, it is quite complicated if you're not in the field, and most of us aren't, you know, in a particular field. So research always needs to be translated for the audience, and that's generally true whether you're talking to a general audience or whether you're talking to politicians or policymakers. You have to sort of try and translate it and speak the language. But of course, then how you do that and how you frame that depends entirely on the audience. So for the general public, very often when we talk about science communication, we're talking about a general audience. So you might be talking, you know, you might be on social media, you might be on a TV or in radio or whatever. So it tends to be sort of lighter, of course, always factual, but nevertheless presented in a lighter way, maybe more accessible, more relatable. It might even need to be entertaining because, of course, science journalism has to compete with other stories as well. But of course, for policymakers, it's a different story because they're interested in the evidence and the research to inform a particular policy. So you're framing it in the context, the way you sort of set out and explain things is going to be different. You're focused maybe a little bit more technical, albeit in a way that is accessible for policymakers and politicians, but it is very, very different because they are, of course, trying to frame maybe or develop a particular policy issue, or you're maybe trying to address a particular policy problem. So, for example, we had a discussion here, I'm sure as you all did in your countries in Ireland during the COVID crisis around mask wearing, and of course there would be lots of, you know, communication about that and in sort of general media. About whether or not you need to wear masks or whether people liked wearing masks or behavioural science and things like that. But when the policymakers come to actually set, they need hard evidence and hard data. And so it's a different audience and you're presenting your data in a different way. So I suppose the point here is good communication is always very important, but you do need to think about your audience and adapt the way you present your data.